call about 2 in the morning, in the middle of the night, from my boss, and there had been an accident in flight.
Can anyone hear me?
Lost pressure.
Aloha 243.
Roger, cleared to land.
Hey there. Have you ever wondered what it feels like to be stranded in the skies, thousands of feet above the ground, with nowhere to go? Well, buckle up and get ready for some jaw-dropping tales. We're diving into the fascinating world of in-flight incidents, where passengers and crew members find themselves in heart-pounding situations that will make your palms sweat and your heart race. From unexpected turbulence to engine malfunctions and everything in between, these stories will leave you on the edge of your seat. Aloha Airline Flight 243. On that fateful day in April 28, 1988, something happened that would become infamous in the world of aviation. Flight 243 set off on a journey that would be ever remembered for generations to come. This flight carried a total of 89 passengers, all with their own stories and hopes, and 6 dedicated crew members who were there to ensure a safe and comfortable journey. Among the crew were 2 individuals who held the responsibility of guiding the aircraft through the skies. Captain Robert Schornsteimer, a seasoned veteran with years of experience, and his trusted first officer, Madeline Tompkins, a skilled aviator in her own right. Together, they possessed an impressive cumulative flight experience of over 10,000 hours, specifically with the Boeing 337, the aircraft they were about to command. Now there's something about this plane. It had been around for quite a while, a real veteran in the sky. Can you believe it? It was already 19 years old with about 10 more years to go before reaching its expected retirement age. But don't let its age fool you. On the day of the incident, the plane had been performing like a true champ. It had already completed 3 round-trip flights, shuttling passengers back and forth between Honolulu, Hilo, Maui, and Kauai. No hiccups or problems whatsoever. It seemed like just another routine day in the air. Before the fateful flight, the crew did their pre-departure inspection, just to make sure everything was in shape. And guess what? Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. They couldn't find a single thing to raise an eyebrow at. The plane appeared to be in tip-top condition, ready to soar through the sky without a worry. Not only that, the aircraft had recently passed some serious inspections. It had gone through a Boeing service bulletin, which is like a fancy maintenance recommendation from the manufacturer. And on top of that, it had even aced an airworthiness directive inspection. That means it had been thoroughly checked by separate inspectors to ensure it met all the safety requirements. So, on paper at least, everything pointed to this plane being in impeccable condition. It had a clean bill of health and was raring to go. Who would have thought that such a seemingly well-maintained aircraft would soon face a terrifying ordeal? It just goes to show that sometimes, even with all the inspections and paperwork in the world, unexpected things can happen in the sky. As the passengers started making their way onto the plane, there was one sharp-eyed traveler who noticed something that made her uneasy. She glanced out over the boarding bridge and, to her surprise, spotted a crack in the fuselage of the aircraft. It was right there, positioned smack dab in the middle between the aircraft door and the bridge hood. It was definitely not something you'd want to see before taking off. Now you'd think that this observant passenger, being the responsible person she was, would rush to inform the airline staff about the concerning crack. But here's the twist. She assumed that the airline crew must have already been aware of this issue. Maybe it had been reported before, or perhaps it was just a superficial crack that didn't pose any real danger. Whatever the case, she decided to keep quiet and didn't bother mentioning it to any ground crew or personnel. Soon, as the engines roared to life, Flight 243 ascended into the sky without incident, climbing higher and higher into the heavens. Inside the cabin, the passengers were settled in their seats, following the instructions to keep their seatbelts fastened. Oblivious to the impending danger, they went about their business, chatting or perhaps gazing out the window. Little did they know that a shocking turn of events was about to unfold. Up in the cockpit, the pilots were diligently flying the plane, working to level it off at an altitude of around 24,000 feet. But suddenly, out of nowhere, A tremendous boom shattered the tranquility, piercing through the air like a thunderclap. In an instant, chaos erupted in the cockpit. The deafening sound was accompanied by the terrifying rush of howling wind, engulfing the pilots in a whirlwind of confusion. The sheer force of the explosion sent shockwaves through the aircraft, rattling its structure and jolting everyone on board. First, Officer Tompkins felt the force hurl her head backward, and as she regained her bearings, she gazed upon a disconcerting sight. Pieces of debris, like insulation foam, floating around in the cockpit. It was then that the pilots glanced behind them, only to discover that the entry door to the cockpit was missing. But that wasn't all. As they peered upwards, where the first-class ceiling should have been, all they could see was an endless expanse of blue sky. In the first-class section, panic ensued as passengers clung desperately to their seats. Their terror became so obvious. They had witnessed a horrifying event, the rupture of a small section on the left-hand side of the plane, triggering explosive decompression within the cabin. In an instant, the roof was torn off, propelled by ferocious 3-mile-per-hour winds. Now, normally aircraft have cabin air systems in place to regulate pressurization, airflow, and temperature, ensuring the well-being of passengers. However, in Flight 243's case, an 18-foot section of the roof and sides had been violently ripped away, taking the passengers' oxygen masks with it. Thankfully, the passengers remained securely fastened in their seats, but the cabin crew standing in that section of the plane had to grasp onto anything within reach to avoid being swept away. Tragically, one flight attendant, Clarabelle Lansing, was unable to withstand the sheer force and was swept out of the gaping hole in the aircraft's left side. Michelle Honda, another flight attendant, was thrown to the ground but managed to crawl along the aisle, checking on passengers and doing her utmost to keep them calm amidst the chaos. Inside the cockpit, the pilots swiftly donned their oxygen masks, realizing the gravity of the situation. They soon discovered that their controls felt loose, and the plane began to rock violently from side to side, teetering dangerously close to an uncontrolled descent. Despite the overwhelming noise in the cockpit, making communication nearly impossible, First Officer Tompkins managed to change their transponder to an emergency code, signaling to air traffic control in Honolulu that they urgently needed to make an emergency landing in nearby Maui. However, her transmissions were drowned out by the cacophony echoing through the cockpit. With the odds stacked against them, the pilots used hand signals to communicate with each other and the flight attendants. Time was of the essence, and they initiated an emergency descent without hesitation. The plane hurtled downward, descending at a rapid rate, at times dropping at a breathtaking speed of over 4,100 feet per minute. Under normal circumstances, the ideal rate of descent for passenger jets above 10,000 feet is around 3,000 feet per minute to ensure a controlled and safe descent. However, given Flight 243's dire circumstances, their sole objective was to reach the ground as swiftly as possible. Luckily, the flight attendant, Madeline Tompkins, managed to reach the emergency channel on Maui and called for help 18 minutes past 5 p.m. She urgently requests an emergency landing and asks for medical equipment because she's afraid there might be a lot of injuries and even some fatalities. Meanwhile, over at Kahului Airport, the folks there started preparing for the emergency. They knew something serious was happening, and they wanted to be ready to assist as best they could. Time was of the essence. As the plane continued to descend, the passengers in first class started struggling to breathe due to the lack of oxygen. It was a terrifying situation. But when the aircraft finally reached below 10,000 feet, Captain Schornsteimer slowed it down according to air traffic control's speed limitations. At least now, they could breathe a little easier. The captain then realized that to land safely, he needed to be going at least 130 knots, but he was currently at 170 knots. It was a tough call. He decided to slow down further and turn the plane towards the runway. The passengers and crew held their breath as they made this critical maneuver. To make matters even more nerve-wracking, there was a problem with the landing gear. The main gear light showed green, indicating it was down and ready for landing, but the nose gear light remained red. They tried to manually override the system, but the light still wouldn't turn green. It was a nerve-wracking situation, but they couldn't waste time trying to fix it. They had to make a quick decision. Captain Schornsteimer decided to go for the landing despite the uncertainty. If the front landing gear didn't go down, it would be disastrous. But they had no other choice at that point. They had to put their trust in the landing gear and prayed that everything would be okay. Thankfully, it turned out that the indicator lights were malfunctioning. The nose gear was, in fact, down and ready for landing. With a sigh of relief, Schornsteimer and Tompkins touched down on the runway after 13 minutes of sheer terror. But when emergency services arrived at Kahului Airport, they were shocked by the extent of the damage. The plane looked like it's been torn open like a can of sardines. Out of the 89 passengers and crew, 65 of them were injured, with 8 in serious condition. Tragically, one passenger, Clarabelle Lansing, didn't make it. Her body was never found. It's hard to believe that a passenger jet could suffer such a catastrophic failure. The investigation revealed that the fuselage of the plane had weakened over time, and the crack that caused the initial failure had been missed during inspections. The maintenance practices were lax, and the oversight was inadequate. As a result of this terrifying incident, aviation authorities completely revamped their inspection and maintenance regulations. They established new programs to control corrosion, ordered fleet-wide re-inspections if a defect was found, and made sure that older aircraft received thorough inspections. It was a costly and extensive undertaking, but it was necessary to prevent such disasters in the future. The brave actions of Captain Schornsteimer, First Officer Tompkins, and the entire crew were rightfully celebrated. They were heroes. But it's unfortunate that it took an incident like this to prompt the necessary changes in the industry, which was captured in several documentaries with the caption, "A plane lost its roof at 24,000 feet. This is what happened next." British Airways, Flight 5390. Here is another chilling story of a freak accident in the sky. You won't believe what really happened in this aircraft. On June 10, 1990, British Airways Flight 5390 was scheduled to transport 81 passengers and 6 crew members from Birmingham to Malaga. The aircraft of choice was a BC-111, a reliable workhorse of the skies. Among the experienced airmen on board were Captain Timothy Lancaster and co-pilot Alistair Atchison. Together, they possessed an impressive total of nearly 2,200 hours of flight time on BA-111s, instilling confidence in their passengers as they prepared for takeoff. At 17,000 feet above the ground, with the flight progressing smoothly, the pilots felt comfortable enough to loosen their seatbelts and inform the cabin crew that they could initiate meal service. Nigel Ogden, an air steward, soon entered the cockpit to inquire about the pilot's breakfast preferences. Little did anyone know that this routine exchange would soon be overshadowed by a terrible turn of events. Without warning, 2 panels of the left-hand side cockpit windscreen suddenly blew out, causing rapid decompression that violently rocked the aircraft. Chaos ensued as the air rushed out of the plane like a wild tornado, shaking it violently. And guess what? Poor Captain Lancaster got caught in the middle of it all. The force of the explosion sent loose objects hurtling through the cockpit, including Captain Lancaster himself. In a horrifying moment, his body was sucked out of the plane head first, leaving only his feet caught on the control column. As if the situation wasn't dire enough, the explosion also tore the cockpit door off its hinges, smashing it into the center console and obstructing essential instruments. With the captain's feet inadvertently pushing the control column forward, the autopilot disengaged, and the aircraft nosedived into a terrifying descent. Amidst the chaos, Nigel Ogden, displaying immense bravery, leaped forward and managed to grab hold of the captain's waist, preventing him from being completely pulled out of the plane. As the pressure equalized and the wind roared back into the cockpit, creating a tornado of debris, Captain Lancaster found himself pinned against the top of the fuselage, with Ogden desperately clinging on. The wind howled, threatening to tear them apart, but Ogden held on with a determination that defied all odds. It was a true battle against the forces of nature, an epic struggle between life and death. The sheer strength of their wills kept them tethered together, a bond forged in the face of unimaginable danger. Meanwhile, co-pilot Atchison struggled to reach the essential controls as the plane plummeted. He sent out a distress call, hoping that it would be heard over the roaring wind. The aircraft hurtled through one of the busiest airspaces in the country, heightening the urgency of the situation. 2 additional flight attendants fought their way into the cockpit, joining the struggle. They grabbed hold of the captain's feet, providing additional support and stability. With their assistance, co-pilot Atchison managed to regain control of the plane and initiated a slower descent, attempting to bring the aircraft to safety. However, the ordeal was far from over. Captain Lancaster's body began to slide down the side of the plane, leaving his face pressed against the window. Inside the cockpit, a sense of despair settled in. It appeared that he had not survived this traumatic experience. The thought of letting go of his body briefly crossed their minds, but Nigel Ogden vehemently rejected the idea, understanding the potentially catastrophic consequences if he were to be sucked into the engines. In an extraordinary display of skill and resilience, co-pilot Atchison, now solely responsible for flying the plane, navigated the aircraft without the aid of charts, checklists, or his captain. With the guidance of air traffic control, he was directed to an unfamiliar airport, Southampton Airport. Relying solely on the controller's instructions, he miraculously managed to bring the aircraft down and execute a safe emergency landing. As the relieved passengers disembarked, they expressed gratitude for their lives, having witnessed moments that made their hearts skip a beat. Remarkably, not a single injury was reported. However, the story took an unexpected turn when Captain Lancaster, who had endured unimaginable conditions outside the aircraft for 20 minutes, was discovered to be alive. Despite suffering from frostbite, bruises, and a few minor fractures, his survival was nothing short of miraculous. After a brief recovery period in the hospital, Captain Lancaster defied the odds and returned to service a mere 5 months later. The resilience and determination displayed by the crew, along with the extraordinary circumstances that unfolded, made this aviation tale one that would be retold for years to come. It stands as a testament to the indomitable spirit of those who soar through the skies and the power of hope in the face of unimaginable challenges. So what was really wrong with the plane? Now, a few days before that fateful flight, the plane was in for a routine service. Among the laundry list of things to fix, the captain's side windscreen needed a replacement. Now, here's where things go a bit haywire. The shift maintenance manager, thinking he could handle the job himself, decided to take matters into his own hands. Now, mind you, it had been a hot minute since he last replaced a windscreen, but did he bother to consult the plane's manual? Nope. He went in guns blazing, or maybe we should say bolts unscrewing. He meticulously removed all the 90 bolts securing the windscreen, and he noticed they were a tad corroded. So what did he do? He thought, hey, let's replace them too. Sounds reasonable, right? Well, not quite. The replacements he used were a hair's breadth too narrow, only 0.02 of an inch. Now here's where the plot thickens. Without giving the work a thorough once-over, the plane was put back into service for its next flight, Flight 5390. Little did anyone know, disaster was lurking in the skies. As the plane soared higher and higher, the pressure started tugging at those narrow bolts, and before you could say oops, they popped right out of their holes. The replaced windscreens couldn't take it anymore and decided to take a leap of faith, quite literally. Can you imagine the sheer terror? Our poor captain, caught in the middle of this airborne chaos, nearly had his life snatched away. It was a close call indeed. Now, here's the real kicker. This incident was a wake-up call, exposing an aircraft maintenance culture that prioritized getting the job done quickly, often sacrificing basic safety regulations. But fear not, for from the ashes of this harrowing event, change emerged. The investigation's findings prompted sweeping reforms within British Airways. No longer were shift managers allowed to self-certify their own work. Engineers received periodic retraining, and everyone had to recertify their qualifications every few years. Safety took center stage, ensuring that any unsafe habits were swiftly kicked to the curb. So, thanks to the lessons learned from this heart-stopping ordeal, you can now fly with confidence, knowing that you'll be safely inside the plane, not on top of it. Now it's time for today's subscriber pick. As you gaze at this image, what does the inscription tell you about the reality of these passengers? A plane lost its roof at 24,000 feet. This is what happened next. Could this really be a true life experience while on a flight very high above the ground and sea level? But here's the twist. We have an exclusive video that takes you deep into the heart of the chaos. You'll witness firsthand the harrowing moments that unfolded after this catastrophic event. What caused this catastrophic roof failure? How did the brave individuals on board manage to survive against all odds? The answers to these burning questions await you in the full video. But we don't want you to be just a spectator. Kindly join the conversation to be part of a community that thrives on adventure and exploration. Share your thoughts, reactions, and speculations in the comments section below the video. Connect with fellow thrill seekers, aviation enthusiasts, and those hungry for the extraordinary. Delta Flight 1425. Hold on tight because we've got another gripping aviation tale that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Did you know that it's not just explosive decompression that can send pilots scrambling to make an emergency landing? Back in June 8, 2019, Delta Airlines Flight 1425 took off from Atlanta Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport with 148 passengers on board, bound for Baltimore. Now, this particular flight was a routine 1.5-hour journey on Delta's reliable McDonnell Douglas MD-88 aircraft. Passengers were accustomed to smooth trips, but little did they know that fate had something else in store for them that day. As the plane climbed into the sky, the peaceful hum of the engines was abruptly shattered by a loud boom. Startled passengers glanced at each other, first thinking it might be turbulence. But then, an ominous smell filled the cabin, a pungent metallic scent that could only mean one thing: smoke. Panic began to set in as burning metal invaded the air. Flight attendants swiftly sprang into action, working tirelessly to keep the passengers calm and relay the situation to the captain. But things took a turn for the worse. The aircraft suddenly decelerated, and a stifling heat enveloped the cabin as the air circulation faltered. It was a nerve-wracking moment for everyone on board. In the midst of this chaos, a passenger named Logan Webb glanced out the window and witnessed a startling sight. What was that? There, right outside, was the engine's nose cone, detached from the central shaft and dangerously rattling against the fan blades. The exposed, red-hot center of the engine was a chilling sight to behold. Realizing the severity of the situation, the captain decided to prepare the passengers for an emergency landing. Miraculously, the plane touched down safely in Raleigh, North Carolina. No injuries were reported, and everyone was promptly transferred to another flight. Now brace yourself for this jaw-dropping revelation. Initially, the airline downplayed the incident. Can you imagine? They had the audacity to suggest that it was just a possible issue with one of the engines. Now let's be honest with ourselves. Witnessing a nose cone detach from an aircraft mid-flight goes way beyond being a mere possible issue. It's a bone-chilling, heart-stopping nightmare that no one should ever have to endure. Aviation expert John Cox chimed in, claiming that the plane wasn't in imminent danger because airliners are designed to fly with one inoperative engine. While that may be true, one can't help but think that a detached nose cone dancing around the engine's fan blades is far from an ideal scenario. Delta Airlines, however, remained tight-lipped about how this harrowing incident occurred. They did reveal their plans to retire all MD-88 aircraft from their fleet by 2020, suggesting that this incident may have played a part in their decision. Flybe Flight 1284. Landing in a big passenger jet can be nerve-wracking, with all those people on board and the sheer size of the aircraft. But did you know that when you're on a smaller plane, it takes fear to a whole new level? Well, the brave souls who were on Flybe Flight 1284 on February 23, 2017, can definitely vouch for that. This flight, which had departed from Edinburgh, Scotland and was heading to Schiphol, Amsterdam, was no ordinary jet. It was a Dash 8 turboprop-powered plane, so no fancy jet engines or nose cones to worry about here. But that didn't mean everything was smooth sailing for this flight. After enduring a 90-minute delay at takeoff due to bad weather, the plane, carrying 59 passengers and 6 crew members, finally had its eyes set on the landing strip. Little did they know, they were in for quite a wild ride. As the plane made contact with the ground, all hell broke loose. In an instant, the right side landing gear collapsed. Can you imagine the sheer panic that must have swept through the cabin? Passengers were holding their breath, hoping that nothing worse would happen. It was a broken landing gear blade flinging through the fuselage. Thankfully, luck was on their side that day. Miraculously, none of the passengers or crew members were injured. However, the airport wasn't taking any chances and called in the emergency services just to be safe. Now, the investigation into this heart-stopping incident took over a year. The Dutch Safety Board carefully combed through the details and released a whopping 50-page investigative document. Talk about thoroughness. Here's the scoop. It turned out there was a faulty proximity sensor that went undetected. And to make matters worse, there was a slight flaw in the main landing gear yoke, the part that's connected to the wheels. Can you believe that this flaw had been lurking since the plane was first built? It's like a hidden time bomb that went unnoticed until it was too late. So when you combine this hidden flaw with the dodgy sensor and the challenging weather conditions at Schiphol, disaster struck. The main landing gear strut couldn't handle the excessive torsion and gave way, resulting in a landing that was, well, a little lopsided. But hey, in the grand scheme of things, it could have been much worse. As the saying goes, any landing you can walk away from is a good landing. And luckily, that's exactly what happened in this case. Passengers and crew members may have had their nerves rattled, but they all made it out unscathed. Splash landing. What was your last excitement on the beach? The majestic ocean waves, soaring seabirds, or fishing ventures? Well, hold on tight because you won't believe how these sunbathers escaped their Waterloo and suddenly turned it into a media adventure. On a fateful April evening in 2021, the Cocoa Beach Air Show in Florida was in full swing. The sky filled with the thunderous roars of aircraft from different eras, taking off from the nearby Patrick Space Force Base. Thousands of spectators gathered on the beach, eagerly awaiting the breathtaking displays in the sky. Among the aircraft participating in the show was a TBM Avenger, a classic World War II era plane. As it soared overhead, something seemed off. The engine noise wasn't quite right, and a sense of unease washed over the crowd. Suddenly, their worst fears were realized. The lone engine of the TBM Avenger suffered a catastrophic mechanical failure, cutting out entirely while the plane was still in the air. Panic erupted among the spectators as they witnessed the unthinkable. With the engine silent, the pilot had no choice but to make a daring emergency landing. The aircraft gracefully descended, not onto a solid runway, but into the water. The crowd held their breath as the plane splashed down, creating a dramatic scene against the backdrop of crashing waves. Thankfully, this story took a miraculous turn. Despite the unexpected turn of events, no one in the water was harmed. The pilot skillfully maneuvered the TBM Avenger to land in the shallows, avoiding any risk of drowning. It was a stroke of luck that no swimmers or beachgoers were in harm's way at the time. While the pilot emerged from the water unscathed, the same couldn't be said for the vintage aircraft. The damaged TBM Avenger had to be removed from the beach and towed back to the base. Experts estimate that it will take years of extensive repairs to restore the plane to its former glory. In the end, it was a clear case of prioritizing human safety over the preservation of a machine. The pilot's well-being was the top concern, and fortunately, they escaped the incident without harm. The TBM Avenger may have met an unfortunate fate, but it served as a reminder that in emergency situations, it's better to sacrifice the plane than risk the life of the pilot. This incident at the Cocoa Beach Air Show will surely be etched in the memories of those who witnessed it, a testament to the unpredictable nature of aviation and the bravery of pilots who navigate through challenging circumstances. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.